welcome and thank you so much for joining us on this webinar talking about SOX controls and access reviews. My name is Austin Grajek. I'm the VP of Audit Solutions here at QoS. We're lucky to have two experts in the audit and compliance world joining us today. We have Shannon Noonan, President, and Stacy Cameron, CEO of QoS Consulting Solutions. And so thank you so much for being here. We're really looking forward to getting into talking about compliance and SOX and how it relates to access reviews. With their combined knowledge and experience in these industries, we're going to be talking about SOX compliance. I'll pass it on over to them, and they're going to be specifically talking about what it is, what's behind it, and why we have to do it. Most importantly, they're then going to go into how SOX compliance relates to access reviews. After their portion of the presentation, Gary Grajek, CEO of attest, will outline how attest solutions make ease of these access reviews. Finally, we're going to jump into a quick brief demo showing these capabilities, and then hold your questions. You could definitely chat them in, type them in. They'll be stacking up in the background. We're going to open it up to Stacy and Shannon to answer any questions you have for them, as well as Garrett and I will be answering those. So with that being said, really excited to get started. I'm going to pass it on over to Stacy. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Austin, for that introduction, and welcome everyone. So let's have some fun and let's talk about SOX. So what is SOX compliance and why does it exist? Why do we even care about it? Next slide. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 is pretty much designed to increase transparency in corporate governance and financial reporting. So essentially, it came about to protect the public and shareholders from these large firms. And everyone knows and remembers in the early 2000s with Enron and Tyco and WorldCom and Peregrine Systems and Adelphia, a lot of the, we'll say, financial scandals and indiscretions that were coming about. So the Sarbanes-Oxley Act came about to protect the shareholders and the public. So the act is designed to increase the confidence in financial reporting and information to strengthen our capital market systems. So it's all about your financial systems, not like some of the other compliance areas that we've spoken on before. And with any federal act, there's always, there's an oversight board, there's a regulatory agency. So you have the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, the PCAOB. They oversee the audit and the public companies, and your auditors that are registered within the PCAOB. And then you have the SEC, that's the oversight of the PCAOB. And also, essentially what SOX does is it made the CEOs and the CFOs, it made them responsible. They literally have to sign off on your SOX reports. It made them responsible for their financial and accounting practices. So you don't have the case where maybe an internal auditor or what have you is signing off, but your CEOs and CFOs are taking accountability. And it's not just for national companies, but international companies, they are beholden to the SOX compliance requirements as well, if they're on the US exchange and they have about 500 or more US-based shareholders. Next slide, please.
Great, thank you, Stacy. So as Stacy mentioned, there's SOX is holding people accountable and making them required to do certain pieces of access reviews as well as other controls. There's three sections that I want to highlight in Sarbanes-Oxley Regulatory Requirements. One's Section 906, which is each periodic report containing financial statements shall be accompanied by a written statement by the CEO and CFO. That goes back to Stacy's point of holding management accountable or upper management accountable for the financial statements. They can't no longer say they didn't know. They need to know. Section 302 requires senior management to certify the accuracy of the reported financial statements. So they're signing off saying that these financial statements are appropriate. And the one that really we're going to hone in on is section 404, which requires management to establish internal controls over financial statement reporting and attest to the adequacy of those controls. So user access review relates to Sarbanes-Oxley in the form of a control. It's a control that sits there and says, do you have the right access for your teams, right? So as part of 404, we've highlighted a few key ones, but all of you need to cover all of these points. But really, as it comes to user access controls, you're going to assess both the design and operating effectiveness, which means, is it designed properly and is it operating properly? So you would design your user access control, and we'll go more into how that could be designed and how periodically you would do it. But then you would also test that. We will also go down into more of how that's tested and what type of documentation. But this is just showing you, this is where user access reviews come into play, is under the 404 regulatory requirement for verifying your internal controls and having internal controls in place. Next slide. Access reviews and SOX compliance. So, oh, sorry, I paused. So access reviews around SOX compliance. What is needed to be done here? So your controls in SOX can be automated, preventive, and or detective, and you can complete them in a periodic basis. What that means is you can do it once a year, you can do it quarterly, and you could do it biannually, monthly, whatever the cadence is that you need to do based off of your risk. All SOX controls is a review of data, access to data points that impact your financial statements. So we'll get more into the scoping and how scoping is done, but as you start figuring out how you scope your data points and what you need to do, that determines, it's all based off of financial statement audits. What is a financial statement and where does that impact? Next slide.
Now that Shannon's talked about your ITGCs, these are the controls. So you have what we're talking about with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which is telling you need to protect the financial systems, and you have to include these internal controls, and you have your ITGCs that come back with the controls that are more prescriptive on what you need to do. So part of that, and what we're going to highlight today, is access reviews. So what is included in the access review process, right? So we have what types of access is coming into scope. So could be privileged or administrator access, there's end user access, and not just the role that's accessing it, but the authenticators that are used, and with passwords and any other parameters that you're using to grant authorization, whether you're using password certificates or what have you. And definitely key that we're going to hone in on today, your access authorization. So your approvals that are required to grant access, right? Making sure that before someone has access, that they've completed whatever steps are required before granting them access, which does include having a manager or designated business owner approval for said access. And as well as monitoring, right? Things change within your organization. People change positions, people come, people go. Just making sure that there is a periodic review of access and your roles to validate that it is still, the access that is attained is still appropriate. So sometimes this is done via automation, which is a lot more ease of the process instead of using a manual process. So, and just keep in mind that SOX is applicable, as Shannon was saying, to the company financials. So you want to make sure that you have whichever type of access control systems that you're using, whether you're using identity management systems or whatever type of local access. Just making sure that you're able to adhere to your SOX requirements when you're accessing these systems. And let's go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So now we begin to sort of talk about access reviews. We want to make sure that we're doing our reviews for completeness, and there's also got to be culpability, right? And you can look at it sort of in two different ways when we're looking at our access reviews. There is a control owner, and then you also have your access reviewer. So sometimes these can be the same person or persons, they may have some overlap, but you want to make sure these roles are both being fulfilled. So your control owners, before you even begin to review and compliance, your control owners, they must think through the controls to mitigate financial reporting errors. So they're not just dealing with access controls, they're dealing with multiple internal controls, but they want to make sure that you're thinking about, okay, as we're developing these controls, we have our control criteria and we're building out our controls. How are they going to mitigate any financial reporting errors? And including, as Shannon was talking about, making sure that you have a defined frequency, right? You have a little bit of flexibility. When you're defining your frequency, it should be unique to your organization and how you operate. If you have a lot of people moving in and out of positions or personnel coming and going, you may want to increase your frequency or your thresholds for your review process. But you definitely need to define a frequency. And then you want to define the who and the how. So many times with so many frameworks and regulations, we come in and we understand like, oh, I have to do this, I have to do X, I have to do Y, I have to do Z. I love math. So we define so many things that you have to do, but you never sort of define how it's performed. So within your procedures, you want to make sure you're documenting what are your expectations, what constitutes a legitimate access review in this case. And you want to make sure that you define the how. It's also helpful when you're able to delegate or designate someone else to do it, that you have that consistency throughout this particular control, that the how is defined. And then that's definitely going to help you when it comes down for your auditing, because you want to, as we were saying, ensuring completeness and accuracy within the control validation. And don't be afraid to review your controls as your environment changes, as the organization change. You may want to come up for a control review. You may have to update the control. Just make sure that it's in alignment with the regulations and within the criteria. But there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, our organization operates as such. Let's do this. And then very key, especially when you're prepping for audits, you want to know, how is the review evidenced, right? So what can I show an auditor to say that I've successfully, I'm continuously to review and have sustained good access controls? What type of evidence do I need to produce? Do I need to have, okay, I need a complete user listing or what have you? And then I can see where I have a trail that management approves the access. And then I have a system like attest where I can go in and say, hey, our reviews come up. We have these applications, we have these information systems, we have all these things that are tied to our financial systems. We have these reviewers, and they've gone through and they reviewed against, of course, as we were talking about how we defined how. So the criteria that's already defined to make sure that we're reviewing appropriately. And when you're looking at it from an access reviewer perspective, you always want to look at it from the least privileged principles, right? You don't want to overgive someone access. And sometimes you get into, well, we have roles, we have, role defined access. But are your roles, have you reviewed your roles? Are those accurate roles? Does a role give someone else additional permissions that they may not need to perform their job function? Sometimes you may get access to a system, but because you're in a certain role, but you don't use that system. So sometimes you may need to review those types of things within your environment. And then timeliness, right? Your SOX audits and some of your other audits are looking like your SOC 1s and SOC 2s, you're looking at controls, how they're operating continuously over a period of time. You don't want to miss that one of your review periods. because there's no going back. You know, we've all seen Back to the Future. It has not happened yet the way it was explained to us, but we can't go back and make changes. So we want to make sure that we are accounting for, we don't want to set ourselves up. We want to make sure that we define a frequency that works with the organization, as well as it's something that we can sustain, and make sure we have the right viewers or even reviewers, or you can have a designee to make sure that your review is happening in a timely fashion. And then again, from the control owner to the reviewer, make sure that they understand the intent of the control, how it's reviewed, and the, like we're talking, the evidence. Do you have automation where you can just go get a report and say, hey, yes, this is our evidence. We can show this to our auditors. And this is how we've completed our review successfully. We've done it with our defined frequency. This is what we're looking at, and we're able to demonstrate all of that. Anyone who's gone through an audit knows if you have some type of tool or system where you're already tracking that, it saves you a world of time and headaches, and your people love you. Next slide.
Great point, Stacy. And that really leads into, once you've done all of your auditing and you have all your information, you have to really support evidence for the auditors, right? So management has to make sure that the controls are effective throughout the course of the year. You have to show and prove for, depending on what your year is, we'll say you're from a January 1 to 12/31, you have to show that that whole year your user access reviews and your access controls were working effectively through the year. And if you have an issue, depending on how often you do user access reviews, you can only remediate that issue depending on how often you do it. So say you do a quarterly review, your auditors will ask for evidence of your quarterly review for usually two reviews for the year. And what they want to see is they want to see that a user listing has been provided and that you can show a complete listing of users. How do you verify that there's a total count? So if you have an export in Excel and it says 100 people, how do I know that that Excel spreadsheet is the total count? Nothing was edited and removed. Some people will show that either through a system, some people will show it through a PDF document, some people will show it through a total count. But somehow you have to show that the auditors, that you validate the completeness and accuracy of the report. And then the other thing about these reports is you then break it down, and how do you review it? You review it for multiple aspects. You can review it based off of roles. If people are assigned based off of role types, and that's usually a job is assigned to, a job description is assigned to a role within the system and they're granted specific access. They could be assigned access based off of the type of job they're doing, and they say assign these roles in the system, so that it's not roles based, but they're assigning roles to do their job. And they can also be administrators where they own the entire environment. So it's really understanding what is your functional business user review versus what's your administrative review as well. And once you've defined those different pieces, you do the review. So you have your completeness, you define what you're reviewing, and then you define who you're reviewing, as Stacy said it. So who should be reviewing this information? It should be your owners. Unless there is a segregation of duties conflict, then you have to get outside of that and have someone else review. So an admin can't review themselves. But if they're the administrative owner and they have admin access, someone outside of them has to review and validate their access. So that really comes down to showing approvals. How do you show approvals? So now I've done my review, I've vetted out all this information, I've got my completeness, I've defined it. Well, now how do I show my review? Well, most people show it through emails, a ticketing system, where they attach all of their manual documentation. But there's also other ways which you can do it through a system, like attest does. How often should you be doing a periodic review? It all depends on the risk. We've talked about risk a few times, and it all depends on the data set. You're going to have an ERP system like Oracle or SAP, and your risk is high. So you may determine that you're going to do a periodic review 4 times a year, every quarter, once a quarter. And you're going to review a percentage of each access every quarter until you get a complete thing. Or you're going to review every single user every single quarter. It really all depends on how often does the access change, what's the comfort around it, and are you comfortable around access? Is access volatile where there's a constant movement of change, right? Some environments are agile and they're lean teams, so they're adding and removing access more periodically than some other companies where they've got a standard role, they're large enough, and they have big enough teams. So you really have to identify the risks. Interviews are really aligning to walkthroughs. You have to walk through the process with the auditors, and you have to show them what every aspect of what you do is part of your review. Now, if you change your review, you've got to re-walk through it. So your documentation needs to align with your walkthroughs to make sure you can evidence what you're doing. And you've got to have consistency, because they're going to want to see that same review happen each quarter, or at least the quarters they select. And if there's a difference, you have to explain why it's different. Why did you do something different? Why did you look at it differently? Why did you pull it differently? So you have to always be able to provide that information. So next slide. The difficulties with access audits. There's a lot of them. Really comes down to, did you scope everything in properly? Right? Active Directory is one of those, people would never think of it, can be a pain point, because you can have multiple admin groups and you're supposed to review all your admin groups. So if you find out that you have an admin group, then you have an enterprise admin group, and then you have a global admin group, you're supposed to review all of those admin groups as part of the administrative access. Well, what happens if you miss one? Because you didn't pull the listing properly, or you didn't look at it properly. You need to look at service accounts on all applications. Who has access to the service accounts? How are they being accessed? Are they being managed by a password control policy, LastPass? Can people log directly into them? Are they sudo capability where you sudo into them? Those are the things that also have to be reviewed and vetted out. And then really determining, as I said, your business user review and your admin user review. Some people will do them together, some people will separate them, but it really comes down to your IT teams usually tend to do your admin users depending on who owns the application. Sometimes you have like an ADP where HR owns the system, so your business users end up doing the review. But if you have something like an Oracle where you have an IT team that's supporting it, but you have business users granting, approving access and the IT granting it, then your business users should be reviewing, vetting out this access. The other thing that comes about, especially in early environments, lean environments that are just getting acclimated to SOX or any other type of frameworks, they may have too many accounts. They may have double accounts. So sometimes what they'll do is they'll create multiple accounts for certain users because they wanted to try and separate things out while they were on a lean side. It's really understanding what's there and making sure that you're reviewing how the business relates to access. But the other main difficult thing of access is everything is usually done manually through a spreadsheet. Unless you have a really good identity management tool, which even those are painful. So unless you're a large company, you're not really probably having an identity management tool. So what other tools are out there besides just Excel spreadsheets and exporting these lists out? And that's really what we're going to get to in the next few slides. So next slide.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shannon and Stacy. And Shannon, that was a terrific segue on over to you, attest. They're going to be sticking around. So if you have questions, I see some already coming in, but feel free to chat those in or just hold on to them and ask them at the very end, but they'll absolutely be getting to you. And really appreciate you two for joining us. With that being said, I'm going to pass it on over to Garrett. He is the CEO of attest, and he's going to be talking a little bit about attest and how our cloud capabilities enable us to help you perform access reviews of these. So Garrett, take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you, Austin. And yes, team, the second half of this is the questions. We got the real people on, Stacy and Shannon. Stacy was Director of IT and Risk Compliance at Direct Defense, but before that was at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security as the Information Security Officer. No one knows more about the DoD and those type of regulations than Stacy. I love doing these webinars because I talked to her at first and I'm like, wow, that's awesome. And Shannon needs no introduction. I worked with her over at Silence and then BlackBerry and Director of Global Compliance And the amazing thing about Stacy and Shannon people is they're knowledgeable. No one writes their stuff, and they're actually really easy to talk to, which is pretty hard in our world. Okay. All right, let's go into it. So now you heard Shannon and Stacy tell you what you got to do. Let's talk about a tool that'll help you do it, and it's easy to deploy. attest exists for IGA. That's it. Okay. There's great tools out there like Octa, which we'll talk a couple times in this, that basically do your SSO, your 2FA, your cloud things. Okay, what about compliance? What about the audit side? What about the SOX? Next. That's what we do. We spend a year just looking at the APIs. And I'll tell you why, I got some slides. APIs are the future of IT, by the way, is APIs. How do we integrate into what is this? What you already have, okay? And not recreate the world and get the information that Stacy and Shannon need. They need for your enterprise to be compliant to SOX and whatever. And for what? To do the application reviews, the user reviews, and to trigger on events. That's what attest does, okay? Next. Functionality-wise, rock and roll, okay? That's all we did in 2020. Yeah, there was this other thing going on or whatever. We were worried about compliance, worried about talking to customers, talking to partners, talking to wonderful people like Shannon and Stacy and Raj out there. He's one of the people on the call. Raj Swani on the focal point, saying, what do we need to do access reviews? Okay, what is the information? And we knocked it out. And then we reviewed with people like Shannon and Stacy and says, okay, we need to have reviewers and multiple reviewers break out. And I love that slide that Shannon and Stacy had that said, you know, your business users and your business reviewers and your system reviewers, call them out, put them in a report, make it quantifiable. That's what attest does. Takes all the stuff in the first part of this thing and makes it quantifiable into a report that you say, voila, wonderful stereo auditor. Here is my report. This is the review of all those important counts, including the PAM and the servants counts. And here is a review of the changes. I have something I put in my brain. I say, to me, audit is changes. And it just is. Every time I listen to Shannon and Stacy, my programming brain goes, okay, you're talking about a change. You're talking about a change. You're talking about a change that I need to show evidence. Not only that it did the change, but who the heck approved that thing? And that's what, when Austin does the demo, we'll show you we quantified in this brilliant cloud product. Next. Okay, I can't do a product, a software product without saying, what is this and why we're better? Sorry, just have to. I'm trained that way. What really is this? 80% of the people we get on are doing these access reviews manual, and that's painful. I love what Shannon, or was it Stacy, said about Excel. Excel is, so we show this Excel sheet to our wonderful auditors, and they're like, all right, what is this? Is this accuracy and completeness? Can I trust this? So great, you hit the damn down button and you hit a PDF. Is that still trustable? Is that really the resource? attest goes right into the APIs and calls it out and says, here it is. There is no middleman. We are directly in there and getting the information. Or you can use the legacy products. And I'm not going to bash them. I don't do that. They're just designed before there were brilliant ways to do this. What I mean by that is they're recreating the wheel. And let me show a slide to show what I'm talking about. This is how standard IGA products are done. Not a bad way. They did what they did what they had to do. I mean, we all do what is available, especially in IT. Okay, they wrote agents and they pulled information from this. And as the world expanded, they wrote more agents. It's expensive on their side and difficult and hard for you all to deploy. Next slide. So now that there's tools like Octa out there and soon to be other platforms that we're working on, right? Why not go directly to the source, pull the resource information from there, work diligently to secure, and then get that actual API reviewed and then compliant to the way Octa do it, Octa verified we are, is do it that way. Now you have the data. Now focus your engineering team on the reports, on what Shannon and Stacy need to have. What information, How do you quantify it? How do you review it? How do you present it? That's what we did all our work on. Next. Okay, and just because that last slide showed about Octa, rock and roll. We got a bunch of customers now who are not only using us with Octa, right? But say your brilliant system of quantifying the access review in a way that no other enterprise can do it. Let me just dump the file into the CSVs. And not just your resources, but we got PowerShell scripts that just take your AD and dump it into a CSV and upload it. That's it, guys. I mean, everyone out there, and I have very long, some not heated, I don't do that. Yeah, some of Chicago when we get heated. But discussions that AD still exists. You have to, audit that. That's still the primary source of truth for many of your customers. And we're agnostic. Whatever your source of truth, whether you're using something like Octa or your AD, we can take that information, put it up into our cloud attestation piece, and come up with the reports. Next. All right, the favorite word everyone wants on a webinar, summarize. Let me summarize. What we've done is taken what Shannon and Stacy have said, what you need to do. Not me. A bunch of guys got together in 2002, created Sarbanes-Oxley because of wonderful things like Enron, and created this thing that said, we have to show internal controls. Okay, that's what we're doing. We're showing your internal controls, and we're doing it in a 2020 way where we upload the data and it's all in the cloud and it's all reportable, and the integration is in minutes. It's in minutes. We have a running joke where we're called a liar because the reference call said it would be 10 minutes and the actual integration took 3 minutes. That's the kind of liars we like to be. Take it away with the overview and demo of the product. And remember,
absolutely,
people, questions coming because you have the real people on the line. Okay.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I will keep my portion brief because there's a lot that attest could do, but I'm just going to go over it pretty quickly so we could have enough time for the questions coming in for Stacy and Shannon. Going into attest, this is just a high-level overview of a few of the capabilities. So it all starts with our integration into Octa. It's very simple. Garrett said it took 3 to 5 to 10 minutes to set up. And once you have this available to you, once this is ready, you can start pulling information from applications to perform an access review at an application level, or you could pull this from Active Directory or UD if you're using Octa. And so at this point, once you've pulled this information, you can start, what I'm going to show is the actual access review portion of it. And that's the reviewing of it, that's the accepting of it, that's the revoking of something, or delegating out to the right person so they're able to make the right decisions as to this access. Finally, what comes about of this is the actual report. This is what we're talking about, being able to show that there is actually this evidence available. Stacy was talking about that you want to be able to produce something. And so that's the last thing I'll be showing. Garrett mentioned as well, we do have the capabilities to handle any sort of applications that are not included in Octa that are maybe on-prem. That's through the ability of a CSV import. No problem at all. With that being said, I'm going to jump on over to our demo and just run through this really quickly. I'm going to be showing our access review for an application level. Then I'm going to be showing it for just the triggers that we have set in place so you could monitor changes when they happen. First, I'm just going to log in. And so all we're doing here, we do have a single sign-on enabled, so it's pretty straightforward. When we log in, right here, I talked about the connection. It's extremely simple. This is from start to finish. Just these 3 bits of information and everything I'm showing today and more, you're going to be able to do using attest. Going over here, actually running an, your first access review, this is how it's going to work. You're going to select that you want to run this by an application. You're going to select the API source. We'll keep it simple and just name this app review. And then finally, select the due date. We do have the functionality to have a regular scheduled access review. Once this has been created, it's just going to copy it and set it up for, if you want to do it monthly, quarterly, or yearly, you'll be able to do that, no problem. But at this point, you'll see all these applications. If it's in your Octa environment, it's 100% going to show up on this page, and you'll be able to pull all the information you need. So right here, I'll just select these 3 applications and then scroll down and I'm gonna click done. You'll notice there's a few other options here. Just gonna leave that blank, so we're gonna select everyone, but if not, that would pull a random percent of the users. And then right here, we're just gonna leave this at all users. Once I click done, what's happening is it's putting together this report. It's pulling all the information for those users, and it's putting it on a really nice worksheet where now we can invite the right people to actually attest to this. So this is really useful for what they were talking about with the control owner to set something up. Now, when we go back into this, I'm going to expand it. And so long as Octa's lifecycle management is enabled, you're going to see all the information. You're going to see the role, the profile, the user manager, the job title, and so on. But at this point, what you're seeing is a list of the applications, the users that are associated with them, and then you can even see what type of assignment they had, whether that's individual or group. But the important part right here is the actual process and making sure the right person gets it to review these. So that feature is the delegate. And we have a lot of different options here. You could enter in an email manually. It's going to send this out to that user. They're going to go in and be able to attest to this person. You could assign it to a group, no problem. You just type in what group you're looking for. These are AD or UD groups, and you could select it. But more useful is the ability to automatically delegate. This is simply going to automatically assign all these users to the right person. The right person's going to be invited. They're going to have regular reminder emails saying that they need to complete this and be able to go in, and their next step will be either to certify or revoke access to an application. And so with that being said, that's essentially it for performing these. I'm going to bulk just hit certify on these. We're going to make sure everyone's attested for so we could actually complete this report. And we're going to review just so we could see what that'll look like. Going back out for application audit, we are going to see this 100% complete, and we're going to click execute. So now the user that was revoked, they may not have had proper, the access was wrong, or they had too much access. We're revoking. We click execute, and what's happening in the background, it's generating a really nice report, and that's showing that this time we were able to review these individuals, signed off on it, and you could know with confidence that this was pulled from Octa, so it's accurate. Just reviewing what this report looks like really quick before I hop on over to here. If I zoom in right here, you can see we have the user, the application, and the status as well. We revoke this user, status is revoked, this one's certified. If this is delegated out, all that information is going to show up, who took the action and when it took. Lastly, I want to get into the triggers just really quick, and then we'll pass off to questions. But this is really important for monitoring changes. They were talking about one of the most important things is capturing these changes in your access review, making sure you're aware of when someone maybe gets too much access, is added to a group, or something changes. So I'm simply going to just demonstrate what one of these will look like. You can see we'll name it, select the Octa integration, and then right here, this is where the fun happens, where we're actually specifying these conditions. We have a lot to choose from. This is creating an event hook inside of Octa. And so if we want to see when someone's added to the domain admin group, no problem. We just select group events, user added, and then we'll just type it in. Really easy to set up, really easy to make sure that this is happening. And now it's not just going to create a trigger that's going to alert you, it's going to create a report. And this report can be assigned to someone. So you're making sure that, hey, someone was added to this group, great. Now someone's responsible for reviewing it. We're capturing that log. We're seeing that report, just like on the application level, where they go in, they certify, or they revoke, and they see these changes, they capture it, and you have a well-documented logs of these changes and actions that are associated with them. I know that was a lot. I'm sure there's a ton of questions coming in. We have so much more we could offer, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So with that being said, I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit and go straight into the questions.
Yeah. Take it away, Austin. I'm going to read some of the questions.
Perfect. Let me pull these up.
Stacey, take it away.
Yeah, it looks like Shannon, you might have already called this one out, but going over the question where it's saying management does not perform a review of application roles. I didn't know if you saw this one coming in, but I'll read it off. So the question is, management does not perform a review of application role-based access. However, management has sufficient monitoring controls to address segregation of duties, conflicts through the use of procedural controls. Example, supervisor's review of vendor payments. Is this acceptable for SOX 404 purposes to ignore role-based access reviews?
The answer I would say is no. There's always a possibility that changes can happen to the functions that are assigned to users, especially in ERP systems. So say Oracle applies a patch. It has been known sometimes that that patch will add functions to some of the roles. Not necessarily all the time, but sometimes. So you're supposed to do at least a roles-based review at least once a year. Your risk is lower because it is roles-based, but you are still supposed to do at least a review of access, even for roles-based, once a year. That's just the standard. Now, if your roles base is changing and they are changing the functions within the roles, you should increase that review.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And sorry if there's any overlap with these. I'm just going to read them off as they come in, though. But here's another question. Do I need to apply SOX controls to my entire organization environment, or is there a way to limit the scope?
So this, again, you do not need to apply it to your entire environment, but you should create a baseline so that if another requirement comes up that you need to do user access reviews or other SOX reviews, other control reviews, you have a baseline. SOX is predominantly around financial statement data. So if you have financial statement data that impacts the financial statements, then that would be in scope. So example could be you have a system that creates the proof of delivery date, which is a revenue term for recognizing revenue. And that is in a system that would then filter that date to your ERP system. That would be a trigger that system that has the proof of delivery date that triggers to recognize revenue would be the source of truth. So that system would then become in scope. And your ERP system would be the one that calculates your revenue. So clearly that would be in scope. But could you minimize the scope? Yes, we always like to find ways to minimize the scope because you don't want auditors looking everywhere. You want them to look at specifically what is in scope, your production environments that have financial data.
And one of the things you want to make sure that don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't when it comes down to scoping. Some things become very subjective. So there's nothing wrong with asking your auditors, or even if you have your advisors, asking them to clarify scope. It's going to come up, is this impacting my financial system? There's some things that maybe there's lines clearly delineated, and some things aren't as easily seen to know that there's a difference. So there's no problem, nothing wrong with asking questions about scope.
Excellent.
Oh, and Austin, let me mention to the audience, we have our product manager, Cher, on the call also as well, in case we have product questions. So thanks for joining, Cher. Keep going, Austin.
Thanks for being here, Cher. Thanks, Garrett. Next question is, how early do enterprises usually start their SOX preparation?
So it just depends. So it depends. This is a really loaded question here, but I'm going to try and give the short and sweet answer. If you're going IPO, or if you're being bought by a company that is publicly traded, so we'll start with the publicly traded, bought by a company. If you're bought by a company that's publicly traded, your environment automatically comes into scope if you're material on their financial statements. Material means that you meet a percentage of their revenue. Companies will say anywhere between 2 and 5% is what they would consider material that would make your systems become in scope. So you could be immediately. For an IPO, it all depends on the time of year that you go IPO. So say you go IPO, if you're a January 1 through 12/31 calendar year filing, and you go IPO on January 15th, you have the next 11 months to make sure you have your environment compliant. If you go IPO in June, you have 6 months. And even that has a level of dollar thresholds if you meet certain dollar thresholds in regarding SOX requirements. So there's all these different avenues, but if you start hearing the company say we're going IPO, you should start prepping your environments and doing gap assessments and determining where you stand. If you hear that an acquisition is going to be bought, you should start doing gap assessments. But that would also mean that you need to be probably read into stuff, because they're not going to necessarily just tell you. But those are the criterias. Same with, like, if you start talking about SOC 1s and SOC 2s, right? You have to make sure that you're meeting a period of access requirements for those as well. So that too would mean you have to meet as either, like, depending on the timing, it could be 3 months to a year that you got to make sure your controls are working. So that would also mean as soon as you decide you're going to do SOC 1, SOC 2, you would do your gap assessments and start prepping for it and determine the date that you're going to want your report by. So.
Excellent. Thank you. I see a couple coming in around USS, so I'm going to answer these just really quickly. This one is this compatible with Azure or only Octa? And so the short answer is currently it's compatible with only Octa. We do have the capability of handling applications that you could just upload via CSV, but I could let Garrett talk on plans with Azure, anything around that nature.
We're currently reviewing at deep architectural level, including hirings, to integrate to Azure. We'd love to do a call, put Share on it myself, and we get your requirements, because we definitely feel that's we're getting that request. So the answer is yes, and it's software, so it's just a matter of time. Yes.
Absolutely. And then the other question on UAttest is, how can UAttest help with changes in key groups / apps? And so I'm glad this was brought up, because this was kind of around, what is included in access review, what Stacy was talking about around the monitoring section. So in terms of, how is it going to help with changes? We could outline very specific changes you're looking for with our event audits. That's going to capture just about whatever you're looking for right there. And it's not just going to capture the change, it's going to make sure the right person is delegated out to it to attest to those changes as well. So you're going to be able to see changes, see someone sign off on it, have an accurate logs that's really to review and look over.
Perfect.
We got another one. Oh, yeah, go for it.
Sure, you want to add anything to that about the triggers? Sorry to put you on the spot, but that's what I do.
No, I think he has covered everything related to the event triggers. And yes, we can have those integrated in a way that if you want to change the application level configurations on the Octa side, that can be captured on the UAttest side as well. We can get that better.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, change control. Okay, keep going, Austin.
Perfect. Saw this one just come in. So is there a mitigating control other than annual access reviews that you'd recommend to address the risk of employees transitioning roles within the company and needing access changes?
Hi. Yeah. So that comes up often. As far as mitigating controls, what a lot of organizations would do to address this is when that transition period happens, it triggers a review. Now, with some more sensitive environments, it may trigger review for all access, but in certain cases, it may just trigger review for that particular role that is changing, to make sure that any changes have been, any access that was granted is still required, and then remove anything that's not needed. So usually that would trigger an out of cycle review.
Yeah, as I said, I talked to one customer, Stacey, and they're doing reviews 16 times a year. Right? I mean, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a repeatable process that a lot of times is too manual. Keep going, Austin.
Absolutely. Okay, so this one, does your tool evaluate conflict roles with ERP applications like SAP, Oracle? How about mid-tiered ERP applications like Assist Pro or M2K?
We're working on that. Not yet. We're not taking in the data. So that's a Garrett discussion we're having.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah. but thanks for bringing it up. So I want to get to a couple more. I know we're running low on time here, but right here, we have one. How much of these applications audit can I apply to other standards? We are contemplating high trust for healthcare. Stacy or Shannon, do you want to take that one?
Yep. Streamline. We are all for finding that control applies across the board to multiple frameworks, right? We've mentioned Sarbanes-Oxley, we've mentioned SOC 1, we've mentioned SOC 2. I believe Stacy actually might have mentioned high trust, FedRAMP, you name it, PCI, they all require user access reviews. Some of them require a minimum of every quarter, PCI. Some of them you define how often the reviews are done yourself. Some of them require certain components of access to be done every 30 days, and that depends on the level of FedRAMP you go. So yes, streamline and develop a control that applies across the board. That is the best way to go.
Yeah, so you take your more rigorous control, and that would determine your control activity to meet that criteria, and then it will apply across the board. Some in some environments or some organizations, it's so large that they will contain the SOX requirements to just one particular environment that it applies to. But often what I see is it's just simpler for their administrators and their the ones that are actually their security personnel to implement it across the board. So they have the same controls that they're checking as far as it comes down to like when you're looking into like your IT controls, because of course SOX is going to have that financial piece as well.
Thank you so much. So here's another one that came in. If a private company plans to go public in 2 to 3 years, what are the best practices to ensure that the company will comply with SOX? Should we keep testing the controls prior to the IPO?
This is a really great question. And every company, startup company, or any organization really falls into what do they need to do? You need to implement the controls before you go IPO. As best as you can, because you have whatever period it is to make sure the controls are working effectively by the end of the year. But if you start getting people into routines and doing the controls before you go IPO and understanding what they need to do beforehand, that will make your life easier, so you're not forced to literally force people to do the controls. I actually work with a few customers, and one of them, they've gone post IPO, they're about 2 years in, and we're still reminding teams that they need to do certain components of their controls every quarter or every month. And it's because they're not routine yet to them. They don't know that they need to do them. And they're so busy and lean, they need their hands held. So a lot of times we're actually doing a review for them, and then they're reviewing and assessing the information that was already prepped and ready for them. So if you can get the teams on a routine and understanding it's part of their day-to-day jobs, you'll be much better in the long run. But if you're in a startup and you have a lean team, that might be a little harder. So I would do your gap assessments, start developing your controls, and start figuring out how to implement them with the teams as soon as you can and as soon as is feasible. Also, it's not bad to have controls in place.
Excellent. So
Austin, why don't you take one more? And then we'll let
okay, let's end it off with this one. SOX has been going on for 16 years. What has changed or emerged as the most important part of an audit? And Stacy or Shannon, feel free to take this, or both.
For SOX, completeness and accuracy of data. Validating the data, it really comes down to completeness and accuracy, right? That's the biggest piece. How do we know that the data is accurate? How do we know that this is all of the data? How do we know that the financials are not misstated, understated, right? Those are all the questions that the financial auditors are verifying, and that the IT is supporting and making sure is happening, whether it's a transition of the systems, but validation of the data and accuracy of the data.
And over the period of time, sort of automation has changed in the capabilities of things that are out there to help you meet these requirements and prep for the audit. So the technology that has changed with that as well, while it may not, while it often saves organizations a lot of on their audit cost as well.
Fantastic. Oh, I have a last question for Stacey and Shannon. How do people get in touch with you?
Good question. You can reach us on LinkedIn at QoS Consulting Solutions, or you can also reach us at info@QoS Consulting Solutions with the S.com. And you can also go to our website, that's www.QoS Consulting Solutions. So there's a number of ways that you can reach out. You can, if you forget, you can Google us. I think we're showing up for now.
And if you like us, get you over to Shannon and Stacey. Love it. Okay, y'all. Hey, many thanks, Shannon and Stacey, and Sherry and Austin. Good deal. And everyone stay safe and healthy out there. Happiness.
And Garrett, thank you. It's been amazing.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.